So this morning I find myself in Lithgow in New South Wales, and many of you guys will know that this is one of the only places that makes firearms in Australia, and there's a rich history here of doing so for well over 100 years. Now I've been to Lithgow a couple of times, and every time I've been, the Small Arms Museum has been closed, generally because it's a Friday and they're only open sort of midweek. That's also a problem here because it's Monday. They've been very generous that they're actually going to open it up for us this morning. So I've got a few minutes spare. I'm going to have a little look around because there's some pretty cool displays in this park I've found. And then we're going to head over to the museum and show you what I'm told is pretty darn amazing. Anyway, let's get into it. Pulled in at the Lithgow Small Arms Museum, and yeah, they've opened it up for us, which is very kind of them. And here we go, Brian is here ready to meet us. Morning, Brian.
Hiya. Nice day for it.
So we are at the Lithgow Small Arms Museum, and this is Brian who will be taking us through today. Thank you very much for this, Brian. Now this is a pretty iconic image.
It's the most photographed item in the whole museum.
Yeah.
Copies the Australian Rising Sun hat badge, and it's made up of a sample rifle from each year of manufacture of the SMLE.
Wow.
Started in 1913, the final version was 1956.
So Brian's going to take us through and give us a little bit of history of, obviously the guns that were made here, because we're on the side of the factory, part of that, and also some of the other interesting history about the post-war, what they did to keep busy. So we'll go through a little bit of that as well. But if people want to come and see the museum, they can do so, can't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's open to the public Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays and weekends all year, and during school holidays it's open every day.
Yeah, definitely, and hopefully you guys will see shortly. It's worth getting to if you're anywhere near Sydney, or Lithgow, I guess. Alright, let's go for a little look.
Yeah. So looking at a board of tooling that was manufactured for making 303s, made at the factory in 1918. When the factory started, all the tools were supplied by the contractor, Pratt & Whitney. It took about 6 years for the tool makers in the factory to gain the skill to make all their own.
This was all sort of around the
That's all tooling to make SMLE rifles.
Yep, that was the original purpose.
The factory was set up to make 303s.
Do that.
The contract was to make 15,000 a year. When the First World War started, the Army asked them to increase their production. By the end of hostilities, they had made about 98,000.
Wow.
The workforce went from 240 to over 1,200. They bought more machines in, some from Pratt & Whitney, some from other British suppliers. They started off making rifles, well, I say rifles only, they also made charger clips, little spring-loaded clips that the bullets fit in. They diversified in wartime when England retired the Lewis gun and adopted the Bren. The plans were sent out here and they set up a factory to make them. When England adopted the Vickers gun, plans were sent out here. This factory made 303 Vickers from about 1928 onwards, made upwards of 15,000 of them. When the factory opened, the rifle barrels were rifled. They had the spiral groove put in it with a single point broach tool, which took one cut on one groove, very shallow, took a number of cuts to do one groove, then the barrel was indexed and they started again. Took almost an hour to rifle one barrel.
Wow.
With the L1A1, they went to button broach rifling. You've got a series of cutters on a string. Each one is slightly bigger than the one before it. You pull them through once and the barrel's rifled.
Yep.
Currently they use a cold hammer forge. You start off with a short, fat blank, which you deep hole drill and ream and polish, and then put in a fairly severe machine, which has tungsten carbide hammers. You put a tungsten carbide mandrel in that is a model of the rifling and the cartridge shape, and cold forge and cold hammer the blank in onto that mandrel. The mandrel retreats, the hammers advance. You get a finished barrel out in about 7 minutes.
It's a good improvement.
It came in towards the end of the L1A1,
Okay.
so in the 80s. You can drill a deep hole through the centre of a bar of steel and rifle it, but often you'll get very slight meanderings in that hole. A skilled operator can look through it against the light and say, oh, it's got a little bend in it. There, and you can put it on this, which has a couple of brass supports and a hammer, and tap it and straighten it.
Wow.
So just about everybody that started at the factory was tested on that. About 1% could do it. Barrel straightening was a skilled and reserved occupation. That is the jig.
That is the jig they used.
In cities rifle his barrel on that one,
Oh, yeah.
rotate it and say, oh, about there, tap.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to do that. No chance. I'd be definitely the 99%. What about you? Is that something you can do? No. No, never tried?
No. Inherited some rifles with bent barrels and I've straightened them, but only for display. Would never try for a target on.
No, I've definitely blamed some bent barrels, but probably won't bent.
The factory had a test range and every 303 made was put in a jig identical to this. There was a whole row of them and was aimed in, test fired for function to make sure it worked and for accuracy. Failed either. It went back through the factory, got dismantled and the parts reassembled into something else. Between 1913 and 1956 made about 642,000 of them, so the jig's got to work out.
How does this work?
The recoil mechanism mimics the human shoulder.
Right.
The gun can recoil. It had a temporary telescopic sight dropped on the top. It sat on the foresight blade in the V of the rear sight, and you could look through it and aim at a very small target that was about 5 metres away, and it was then had 5 rounds put through it to make sure it was accurate. It should have been zeroed. There are minor adjustments available. You can put a slightly higher or lower foresight blade on the rifle. You can tap it to and fro. It was done with things like a G-clamp, but it could be pushed around a little bit and checked. This is the main gun room. It's the reason the museum can exist. The company changed from Small Arms Factory to Australian Defence Industries in 1988, and during ADI's period of tenure they decided they didn't need their reference collection, which was a room full of guns comprising samples of guns they'd made, samples they'd brought in for evaluation and comparison. After a bit of toing and froing with Lithgow Council and ex-employees who were keen on the idea, they donated the whole collection to the city of Lithgow for a museum. This is basically that collection. One of the rarer guns we have. Looks like anyone else's SMLE. It is in fact a proof weapon produced by Pratt & Whitney as part of their contract to set up the factory. They were required to produce a small batch using the machinery that they were then going to pack up and send to Australia, and as far as we are aware, that is the only sample that is still intact. At the start of the Second World War, there was just one factory. It was the Lithgow Small Arms Factory. They were immediately deluged with orders from the army, and the site just had inadequate production capacity and room for 2,000 employees. They decentralised. They set up annex factories, feeder factories in all the local towns. So you found small arms factory annexes in Bathurst, Orange, Forbes, Cowra, Wellington, 9 different places. Because of the number of orders they had, they progressively decentralised the rifle construction to the feeder factories, and from about the middle of 1942, when they sent a barrel rifling machine to Orange, the rifles were the sole responsibility of the annexes. All the rifles after that were made in the feeder factories. The Lithgow site, which had 6,000 employees working 3 shifts, concentrated on Bren's and Vickers. And in the peak week of the war, the annexes made 4,000 rifles, and the Lithgow facility made 140 Brent guns and about 70 Vickers guns. That included spare barrels, magazines, carry cases, cleaning gear, the whole bit.
Wow.
After the war in the Pacific simmered down, they reduced the demand and the construction, and in fact the feeder factories started closing before the end of the war.
Yeah.
But they maintained that for months. Yeah. The Australians followed the British in using the Lewis gun as their light machine gun. It had its limitations. The English were actively looking for something to replace it. An English officer was visiting the continent and saw a weapon that interested him at a Czechoslovakian gun show. It was the ZB-26 light machine gun, air-cooled. Rang home and said, "You better have a look at this." And the powers that be were also interested. They asked Bruno, who were the manufacturers, to make trials models for the British in 303 calibre. They played with it for years, and it seems like a competition. How good can we make this thing? Its name evolved from the point of origin, Bruno, BR, and the development, which was done at Enfield. So BR from Czechoslovakia, we implemented. Very accurate, very popular, very hard to jam. Introduced into the British Army in about 1938. Planes were immediately sent to Australia, and a special building here at the factory was set up to make it. Started production in 1941. Survived as 303 through to the end of the war and beyond. When NATO changed from 303 to 7.62, Brens were modified to fire the new NATO round successfully. They were made in England, Canada, Australia. The Canadians got a request from China to make Brens in 8mm Mauser, and they did. So a very adaptable gun, very popular with the troops because of its simplicity, a bit heavy, couldn't jam it, easy to service, and it doesn't kick much.
Yeah, I see that your recoil system goes all the way through the butt.
Well, it does, and it fires from an open bolt. A World War II German anti-tank rifle. It's a shoulder-fired weapon.
Whose shoulder did that go on?
Yeah. It weighs 55 kilos bare. Wow. Then you put a 10-shot magazine on it, and it fires the same round as the heavy machine gun on a Tiger tank. It has a heavily padded shoulder pad, a recoil mechanism in the barrel, and a muzzle brake, but rather you than me firing it. We have 3 anti-tank rifles. It was a losing battle. This would go through 30 mils of armour at 300 yards. As soon as the opposition found out, they increased the thickness of the armour and they'd bounce off. anti-tank rifles as a whole died almost instantly when shoulder-fired rockets were introduced. Early 60s through to the 70s, the factory was very much into lost wax casting, investment casting.
Right.
Where you make a wax model of the item you're going to make. You only need a light aluminium mould to inject plastic into that wax. You then dip it in a liquid brick mixture. Dip it, let it dry, dip it, let it dry. When your coating is thick enough, which is typically about a centimetre, you put it in a kiln. You fire it, turns it into brick, melts the wax out, pour molten steel in, out comes your product. You just got to chip the mould off.
Right. This is in the 60s.
Yep, the items here were made using that process.
Yep.
They're tank tracks for armoured personnel carriers and weapon tanks.
Wow.
Very useful process for items that are hard to machine.
Right.
You've only got to go through the process once to make the mould. After that, you can churn them out, and in fair detail. The other process that was in use was broaching. It depends on very accurate machining in a tool room, and it's a series of cutters, and each one is 1/10 of a thou higher than the previous cutter, and you put it in a big rigid machine and push it past the job once. The first cutter takes a 1/10 of a thou off, the second one takes another 1/10 of a thou off. You can profile the cutters as you go, and when the part comes out, it's done in one pass. That process was used a lot on the manufacture of the All-1A1 rifle.
So these are the actual cutters?
They're the broach cutters.
Yeah, right. Not a process that's used very often these days, or is it still?
It was discontinued here and the machines were destroyed.
Yeah.
Broaching as a process is still used.
Okay.
If they really need
Depending what
some specialised item, they'll buy it in.
Yeah, okay.
A lot of the contraction of the factory is a direct result of changes in technology and manufacturing processes. In here we've got the drop forged blank 17-pound lump that the body of a Bren gun was machined out of, and it took about 250 machining operations and 500 measurements to make that into a 1.75 pound machine gun body. Now the top one is a Minimi. It's molded sheet metal. Folded, welded, check the dimensions, finished.
Must be a lot cheaper and a lot quicker.
Yeah, and a lot less swarf, a lot less waste.
Yep.
303 was still using wooden furniture, wooden stock, wooden forehead. The L1A1 had wooden furniture, some of it was solid, some of it was heat-formed plywood. When they went to the Steyr in 1988, the stock is made out of a fibre reinforced plastic, which can be moulded in one hit. Basically, an example of lost wax casting. The Australian Army in France, Belgium, in the First World War, made a big name for themselves, were very popular, to the point where the French put up a statue, a monument. It is basically an Australian digger bayoneting a German eagle. When the Germans re-invaded in the Second World War, they thought that was a poor idea and destroyed it. In the 60s, there was a commemoration, and the government asked the factory if they would make 3 miniature replicas of that original statue. The factory said, sure, where are the plans? And the government said, no, here's some photos. The factory toolmakers made the lost wax castings for 3 of these miniatures. One has remained here, there's one in the regimental headquarters, one in the Great War Memorial Museum in Broaching in France. That's the sort of detail you can get from lost wax casting. Submachine gun was an Australian invention. Some of the development work was done here, but was never produced here. It was made at the Lysart factory in Wollongong. A number of them came back through the factory here for refurbishment and upgrading after the war. They had a sliding safety catch put on, for example, but the original production wasn't here. At the start of the Second World War, Australian forces were using a mixture of submachine guns. Some were English, the Sten particularly, and the American .45 Thompson Tommy gun. At that same time, a young lieutenant in the army called Evelyn Owen, who was a gun nut and had a backyard workshop, made a prototype of what became the Owen submachine gun. He only had it in .22. He offered it to the army as a prototype and they said, take it away, it's not British. He went back to the army and left the prototype in a sugar bag in his garage, and the house was then rented to the general manager of Lysart, who found the gun, said, interesting, took it to work, they played with it, they argued with the army about what sort of calibre it ought to be. They finally settled on a format and a 9mm parabellum calibre. The army still didn't want it. They were hell-bent on adopting the Sten. But then they announced that they were going to hold formal trials to adopt an Australian submachine gun. And Lysart had enough clout that they said and got away with, include the Owen, what have you got to lose? And the trials were fairly onerous. You dip it in water, you pull it out, shake it, fire it. Dip it in mud, pull it out, shake it, fire it. Dip it in sand, pull it out, shake it, fire it. You show a Tommy gun a photo of a patch of sand and it seizes. The Owen was the only one that survived the trials. I didn't like it, but the army accepted it. It was exceedingly popular with everyone that used it. It was designed for jungle warfare. It was a pistol bullet, short range, spray bullets around, but in the jungle, if you could see your enemy 5 metres away, you were doing well. Lysart finished up making about 55,000 of them. Could have sold as many again to the Americans. The Americans loved it. They were deliberately losing Tommy guns so they could get their hands on an Owen. They were still in use in Vietnam through the Korean War, still in use early in Vietnam. A few models prototypes were made to try and improve it, never could. It was just a good, simple design that worked. It had a vertical magazine on top. It didn't get caught in the bushes when you were pushing your way through the jungle. Gravity helped the bullet in, gravity helped the case out. It had a spring compartment that was separate from the bolt compartment so that mud didn't necessarily jam them both. Very, very loose tolerances. The only accurate tolerance in the whole thing was the barrel, so it could be made pretty well anywhere. And you couldn't kill it with a stick. It worked. With the Owen gun, the vertical magazine was a definite advantage because you didn't have a fairly long magazine sticking out the side to snag on the passing scenery. There are machine guns about, and there's Italian ones and Japanese ones with a magazine out the side. Just generally, vertical magazines feed better. Gravity doesn't pull the bullet sideways, pulls them straight down into the line of the pistol.
Yep.
People can't help tinkering with firearms. And the factory's no exception.
Nothing's changed since either, Brian.
The Lithgow factory was set up to make the SMLE rifle No. 1 Mark III and 3-star. The English lost a lot of their gear at Dunkirk and had to rearm quickly, and there was on the shelf a redesigned 303 called the No. 4. Had been a sealed pattern for a number of years, but nobody was having a war, so they never proceeded to production. After Dunkirk, they dragged the plans off the shelf, and England rearmed and produced a lot of No. 4s. They took the plans to America and approached the Savage Rifle Company and the Long Branch Company in Canada, and the Americans and Canadians finished up making about 2 million No. 4s. Various branches of the military had differing demands for guns, and especially with the jungle type warfare in the Pacific. Both the English and Australian militaries asked for a shorter, lighter firearm, basically a jungle carbine. The English were rearming with the No. 4, so their jungle carbine is a cut down number 4. The Australians were still producing the number 1 Mark III, so our carbine was a cut down number 3. Externally fairly similar, same flash hider, different butt and different receiver, that's the main difference. The Australians asked for a shortened and lightened standard 303, and a number of experimental models were made, never got beyond a few hundred. The war finished before they were ever issued. They had their own problems with a shorter barrel. They were a couple of pounds lighter, so the recoil was fairly fierce, and the muzzle flash was something awesome. They just never resolved their problems before the war finished. The English had the number 4. Their sniper rifle was a modified number 4. The Australians were using the number 1 Mark III, so our sniper rifle was a heavy-barreled number 1 Mark III. There were different variants. The military wanted a firearm basically that didn't have wood on it. They wanted something that would not absorb water, absorb gas. A number of materials were trialled. One of them was Bakelite, not a roaring success. It got a bit brittle when it was hot. One of the bad things about a grenade is that you can't throw it far enough to be outside the shrapnel zone, and an attachment was made to a 303. It's basically a cup that clips onto the muzzle. A Mills grenade will slide in. You slide it in far enough that the cup supports the fly-off handle. You pull the pin, slide it in the rest of the way. Put a heavy-duty blank in the rifle, sit the butt on the ground, point it in the general direction and pull the trigger on it. It will throw a grenade further than you can. They used rifles that were getting towards the end of their service life. They had worn barrels or worn parts. If it wasn't serviceable when you started, it generally was when you finished. They bound the woodwork in copper wire so that if it blew up you didn't get quite so many splinters. They're not good rifles. When the factory started, the buildings, the machines were American, but the contract for materials was led to England. All the different grades of steel that went into a 303 were imported from England. The wood was imported from England, and it was generally walnut. It was an English contract, it was called English walnut. Some of it came from Italy, but that's by the by. And that was the case basically until the end of the First World War. When peace was declared, they could relax a little bit, and they started to investigate local supply. And this board is the 9 local timbers that were tested. They had to be obviously available, renewable, machinable and stable once they were machined. They finally settled on Coachwood and Queensland maple, and most of the 303s after that were made in those 2 materials. All 9 of those were made in 1919. None of them have a serial number, they just got the assembly batches. As far as I know, they've never been fired. They're display samples. Made a lot, 642,000 303s. They were issued exclusively to Australian forces. At the end of the war, tens of thousands of them were returned to the factory. Some of them were refurbished and given to the army for use and storage. They still had a lot left over. They sporterised them and sold them to the general public. The most common was a 22 Hornet. They also made a couple of trial samples of a 310, which was a bit strange because it was an obsolete round even then. They found that you could put a heavy barrel in a 303 and bore it to take a 410 shotgun cartridge, and they made them. It started a trend. Every gunsmith in Australia started pulling 303s apart and putting sporting barrels in them, and they still do. The government asked the factory to make a cheap single-shot 22 for farmers, and there's a range of them there. They started off with the Model 1, which was single-shot. Within a year they modified it and put a magazine on it. It became the Model 12. A shorter, lighter version called the Model 55 was mechanically identical to the Model 12. It was intended to serve the market until the American production caught up with peacetime production. In fact, they made about 215,000 of the Model 1 and about 88,000 of the Model 12 and Model 55. And they, instead of being a 6-month project, they were still making them in 1957. In the Korean War, the English and Australians realised that the bolt-action rifle had its day. The Belgians had been playing with semi-autos since during the Second World War. England, Australia, Canada set up a committee to investigate semi-autos. They were very taken with the Belgian FN. They got trials, models made, played with them for a few years and improved them. They developed a folding, cocking lever instead of a knob that stuck out, different flash eliminator, different carry handle. It was adopted as in Australia was the L1A1, in Canada was the C1. They were retrofitted, they were converted from the Belgian and European metric dimensions to imperial dimensions. Strange decision. They're called inch FALs. The English, Canadian and Australian models were totally interchangeable. Canadian could break his breech block, put an Australian breech block in and go back to work. At the time, South Africa was subject to embargo because of apartheid. Noted the outcome of the committee deliberations and went directly to FN and leased the right to make them. Theirs was made as the R1, probably in metric, so they're not interchangeable. The Indians were outside the Commonwealth by then. They went the same route. Had a mixture of imperial and metric machines, and their rifles reflect that. So they assemble correctly, they work correctly, but the bits aren't interchangeable with the Commonwealth stuff. The L1A1 was introduced in 1958, went through Vietnam, was superseded with the change of NATO ammunition in the 80s. NATO changed its standard from 7.62 to 5.56. Australia went its own way on that occasion and finished up adopting this Austrian Steyr rifle, modified it slightly, it became the Osteyr, made under licence for years until the Lithgow factory became a licensed development arm of Steyr, and they now make their own changes. It's gone through several development iterations. The early models had a fixed carry handle / sight. The Army decided they wanted the adaptability to put a telescopic sight, night sight, whatever on it. So the next model came out with a rail on it. Current model has a fixed barrel, not a removable barrel. It has a rail for mounting a grenade launcher, so you don't need an armour to do it. It has a rail for a tactical torch. Torch needs a battery. They made the butt a little bit bulbous and stored the battery in there. It's evolution rather than revolution. The Army says they'll be using the 5.56 for the next 20 years, but we'll see. Marksman of some note. He worked with the factory in developing the Slazenger single-shot rifle. Also worked with other companies, a sport coat company in Adelaide, for example, to develop his own range of weapons. A lot of them were semi-auto. He advertised by having basically a travelling circus. He was a trick shooter, and he could shoot a penny out of the air. We have a sample here. He could shoot a gramophone needle out of the air. He did a lot of his trick shooting with a little semi-auto Browning. He could shoot at something, and being a semi-auto, the gun would eject the cartridge into the air. He could then turn and shoot the cartridge before it hit the ground. His party trick was to get his assistant to hold an aspirin between finger and thumb, and he would shoot it out.
How many assistants did he go through?
I don't think he lost too many. We have a couple of cartoons, the rabbit cartoons. He drew them from a range of 10 metres with a .22 rifle, fired a series of shots and drew lines to make a cartoon. A lot of his rifles didn't have a foresight. Absolute point-and-shoot marksman.
Wow. Are there any Vickers made here, or are they?
Yes.
There were.
The one in the hands-on over in the corner is made here. They made about 15,000 Vickers between 1928 and 1945. In 2004, a Queensland gun collector extraordinaire decided that he was getting a little bit old and the regulations were getting a bit tough. He donated his collection to a museum we put our hand up and got it. The guy's name was Ron Hayes, and we inherited about 1,540 handguns. So they range from the absolutely prosaic to the absolutely exotic. There's guns in here of which only 6 are known in the world. Of the 1,540, some are duplicates, because if you found a better one you'd buy it and keep the old one. So the best are on display here, the other half are in storage. He died 2 years ago. Until then he used to turn up every 6 months or so and make sure we were looking after his babies. One of the rare ones is a DWM Luger made in Berlin, but for the Portuguese Navy. It's one of 6 known in the world. He didn't specialise in military weapons. We have a cased pair of duelling pistols that he donated. They're a good French maker at the height of his powers, and it's intact. It's never been used, abused, and all the parts and accessories are there. It's almost unique. We know of one other pair that look comparable. We have firearms here that you don't readily associate with weapons manufacture. During the war, the Australians subcontracted anybody with the ability to make weapons for them. And we have here a copy of an Enfield No. 2 revolver made by the Howard Cultivator Company. They make garden hose for appropriate hose. Over in the corner we've got 3 brass-bodied flare pistols. Mm-hmm. The 3 in the top right-hand corner are a Webley, a Wolseley, and a CSR Sugar. As far as we know, our oldest Australian-made firearm. It's a single-shot percussion weapon made on the Victorian goldfields by a blacksmith. Gun that a lot of people have heard of, not many people want to own one, is the Liberator, which was an American design from World War II. Was intended to be cheap and cheerful, single-shot weapon. Take down a German, flog his gun, throw this one away real quick. The contract to make them was let to General Motors. They gave it to their guide lamp division because they were pretty skilled in sheet metal stamping. 2 sheet metal stampings, bit of steam tubes, spot welded together, and 1/8 plate standing breech, fired a 45 ACP bullet. The contract was for 1 million units. They filled that contract in 11 weeks at a unit cost of $2.38.
Wow.
Dardic was an oddball design from the 1960s. It was a revolver, but the rotor didn't have holes drilled through it. It had pie-shaped slots cut out of the outside of it. The bullet was round, but the cartridge was triangular, and when it was primed, ready to fire, the chamber was the 2 sides of the V in the rotor and the top strap of the gun. They made about 1,500 of them. They weren't a roaring success system. A lot of the guns in here, some of them are genuine improvements in technology. Some of them were some guy's idea of I can make a better gun than those can, and some of them were direct attempts to circumvent patents and copyright. I have here one of the few remaining examples of a Colibri, which is the world's smallest semi-auto centerfire. It fires a 2.7mm bullet, and I'm told that the manual recommends that you don't shoot at anyone wearing a coat because it's going to bounce. Peace was declared. They had a lot of machines and a lot of skilled labour and nothing to do.
Right, and so you're showing us before that there's a range of equipment, that we'll have a look at here. There's some car-looking parts here. How did they come about?
When peace was declared, the factory had a lot of machines, a lot of skilled labour, and nothing to do, and they wanted to retain as much of their capability as possible. So they went commercial and tendered for everything that was within their heavy engineering capability. So you can see conrods and crankshafts. They made pieces for railway rolling stock, plough times for agriculture. They've still retained contracts with the military, and there's truck towing hooks, towing pendles, but there's other things that have nothing to do with the military. You can see there's a Telstra badge, and that's part of a mould for Telstra to make bits. Other items in here are ear tag cutters. They made lopping cutters for the forestry, for tree pruning. Made golf clubs for Slazenger from 1935 to about 1980. There's a lot of items that we don't have more that they made when there was no demand for guns, just to keep busy.
I guess that's why it survived and actually had quite a history.
Had a very good reputation. They weren't always a commercial success. A lot of their stuff was made at cost or probably below sometimes, but their quality was unsurpassed. The metrology lab in the 80s and 90s was rated in the top 5 in the world.
Wow.
The factory had a very good working relationship with Slazenger, made golf club heads for the sporting company from about 1935 onwards, for 50 odd years. The factory developed its own range of spanners. Brand was Zircaloy. If you find anything Zircaloy, it was forged and made here in Lithgow. A lot were issued as under army contracts, but I think a fair number walked out the gate in people's pockets as well. So good quality and very popular. End of the war, Australia was pretty much depleted in terms of technology, and the government asked the factory to help budding inventors. Invention was worth developing, the factory was going to help them. And Sunbeam was one such. It was having trouble with its Sunbeam Mixmaster. All the development work in the first batch of Sunbeams were made here in the factory before the dies and jigs were taken to the Sunbeam factory in Sydney. There's a display there of outboard motor shafts, made drill chucks, door openers, spanners. Contracted to Borg Warner to make shafts and gears for gearboxes. We started making whole gearboxes. When the P76 car, Lowland, was being developed, the first engine blocks were machined here at the factory because they had the security and secrecy to do it.
Wow.
The Pennock sewing machine was developed here. The final product was made in Mr. Pennock's Adelaide factory, but the development work was done here. Having done the development work, the factory wasn't backward in using it. There's a photo in existence of about probably 20 sewing machines, and there's about 5 different brands on them. They just put a different sticker on them and set them out. During the Depression, the shearing industry was in trouble. Couldn't afford the imported handpieces. The government gave the factory a handpiece and said reverse engineer this and market it. The only people that weren't happy were the importers. The factory was able to undercut their price and sell about 10,000 handpieces, basically saved the shearing industry. For a long time, the factory has been making handcuffs, sold under the SAF lock heading, used by corrective services and police in every state except Victoria. When moving pictures went from silent to talkies, the factory was involved in making the conversion parts for cinema projectors.
Where we are now is basically a new exhibit that the Arms Museum is putting together, and it's a whole stack of the old machinery that was used that has been brought out from storage and will actually be set up in an exhibit sometime soon. So this will definitely be worth looking at. Brian, that's thank you so much. That was pretty amazing to see. First off, get down and have a look because it's definitely worth the time. We only covered parts of it. You know, we looked at there was about 700 or something hangouts around. We looked at 4 or 5 of them. There is so much to see here. You're open Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday,
and weekends,
and weekend as well.
Yeah, all 7 days a week during
school holidays. And that's New South Wales school holidays, or one would assume.
Yes.
And of course, we're in a gift shop now. Definitely spend
most of what's around us is gift shop. This place is foreign orders.
Okay. Yeah.
Bladens particularly got adapted to all sorts of strange uses, to the point that the factory management put out an email saying that please don't do it, the steel's not good enough, which was totally ridiculous.
Oh wow. So every corner you turn there's something else to see at the Lithgow Small Arms Museum. So Brian, really appreciate your time. It's been wonderful and good luck.